In 1940, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany's air force. German bombers filled the skies, raining destruction on British cities. The Royal Air Force had brave pilots but faced an impossible challenge. How do you defend against an enemy you cannot see coming? The answer lay in a revolutionary technology called radar, and the brilliant engineers who developed it against incredible odds. This is the story of how science changed the course of history. In the 1930s, military planners faced a terrifying new reality. Aircraft technology had advanced dramatically since World War I. Bombers could now fly faster, higher, and carry more destructive payloads. A single bomber raid could devastate an entire city in minutes. Britain's traditional island defenses were suddenly obsolete. The English Channel no longer protected against aerial attack. Enemy bombers could cross from France in less than 20 minutes. The British air defense system relied on human observers. Volunteers stationed along the coast watched the skies with binoculars. They would telephone warnings when they spotted enemy aircraft. But this system had fatal flaws. Observers could only see aircraft when weather was clear. Fog, clouds, or darkness made visual observation impossible. By the time observers spotted incoming bombers, it was often too late. Fighter aircraft needed time to take off and climb to intercept altitude. With only a few minutes' warning, bombers would reach their targets. Before defenders could respond effectively, military leaders knew Britain was vulnerable to devastating air attack. Some predicted that London could be destroyed in a matter of days, that Britain might have to surrender rather than face annihilation from the air. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin expressed this fear in 1932, saying, "The bomber will always get through." This fatalistic view reflected the military thinking of the time. But some scientists believed technology could provide a solution. In 1934, the British Air Ministry became desperate for answers. They established a committee to study air defense methods. The committee was chaired by Henry Tizard, a respected scientist. Tizard understood that Britain needed a technological breakthrough, something that would allow detection of aircraft before they could be seen. The search for this breakthrough would lead to one man, a Scottish physicist named Robert Watson Watt. Robert Watson Watt was born in Scotland in 1892. He studied physics and engineering at University College Dundee. After graduation, he joined the meteorological office, working on methods to detect thunderstorms using radio waves. Watson Watt discovered that lightning produced radio frequency emissions. These emissions could be detected and located using directional antennas. This work gave him deep understanding of radio wave behavior. By the early 1930s, Watson Watt was director of a radio research station. He had a team of talented engineers and physicists working with him. They studied how radio waves interacted with the atmosphere. In 1935, the Air Ministry contacted Watson Watt with an unusual request. They asked if radio waves could be used as a weapon. Specifically, could a radio death ray destroy enemy aircraft? Watson Watt assigned his assistant Arnold Wilkins to investigate. Wilkins calculated that a death ray was impossible with available technology. The power required would be enormous and completely impractical. But Wilkins had a different idea. While radio waves couldn't destroy aircraft, they could detect them. Aircraft flying through radio beams would reflect some of the energy back. By detecting these reflections, you could locate the aircraft. Watson Watt immediately recognized the potential of this concept. He quickly prepared a memo for the Air Ministry, titled Detection and Location of Aircraft by Radio Methods. This memo, written in February 1935, proposed what would become radar. Watson Watt outlined how radio pulses could be transmitted, and reflections from aircraft detected and measured. By timing how long it took for echoes to return, the distance to the aircraft could be calculated. The direction could be determined from the antenna orientation. The Air Ministry was skeptical but intrigued. They asked Watson Watt to demonstrate that detection was actually possible. On February 26, 1935, a test was arranged. A RAF bomber would fly near a BBC radio transmitter. Watson Watt's equipment would try to detect reflections from the aircraft. The test took place in a field in Northamptonshire. Air Ministry officials watched Watson Watt's receiver with skepticism. The bomber flew back and forth along a predetermined path. Suddenly, the receiver's oscilloscope showed a clear signal. The reflected radio waves from the aircraft were unmistakable. The officials were astonished. The concept worked. Watson Watt had proven that aircraft could be detected by radio. The Air Ministry immediately authorized funding for further development. The race to build a practical radar system had begun. Watson Watt was given a small team and moved to a secret facility at Bawdsey Manor on the Suffolk coast. Here, he and his engineers would develop the first practical radar system. The challenges were immense and the timeline was desperately short. Watson Watt knew war with Germany was likely within a few years. The system had to be operational before war began. The basic principle was simple, but implementation was complex. A transmitter would send out short pulses of radio waves. These pulses would travel through the air at the speed of light. When the pulses hit an aircraft, some energy would reflect back. A receiver would detect these echoes and display them. By measuring the time between transmission and echo, operators could calculate the distance to the aircraft. The first major challenge was generating sufficient radio power. Weak pulses would produce weak echoes that were difficult to detect. Watson Watt's team experimented with different transmitter designs. They eventually developed transmitters that could produce pulses of several hundred kilowatts at frequencies around 20 to 30 megahertz. The receiver had to be extremely sensitive, capable of detecting incredibly weak reflected signals, yet it also had to operate next to a powerful transmitter, without being overwhelmed by direct transmission. This required careful frequency management and antenna design. The antenna system was critical to the radar's effectiveness. Watson Watt's team built tall steel towers to support the antennas. These towers eventually reached heights of 350 feet, making them prominent landmarks along the British coast. The display system showed returning echoes as spikes on an oscilloscope. Operators had to be trained to interpret these displays, distinguishing between aircraft echoes and other reflections. By late 1935, the system could detect aircraft at 40 miles range. This was a remarkable achievement, but Watson Watt pushed for more. He knew the system needed greater range to provide adequate warning time. Through 1936 and 1937, the team continuously improved the system. Range increased to 70 miles, then 100 miles. Accuracy improved as operators gained experience. They learned to estimate aircraft altitude and formation size. The Air Ministry recognized that one radar station wasn't enough. A network of stations would be needed to cover Britain's entire coast. This network became known as Chain Home. By 1938, 20 Chain Home stations were under construction, stretching from the southern coast to Scotland. Each station required massive infrastructure: transmitter and receiver buildings, power systems, communication links, and most visibly the towering antenna arrays. Watson Watt coordinated this massive construction effort. While continuing to refine the technology, in August 1938, radar detected its first real threat: a large formation of German aircraft on a flight near Britain. The system worked perfectly, tracking them throughout their flight. When war came 1 year later, Britain would be ready. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, the Chain Home network was operational. 20 stations formed an early warning system along Britain's eastern and southern coasts. Each station operated 24 hours a day with rotating shifts of operators. The stations were connected to Fighter Command headquarters by telephone and teleprinter. When radar detected incoming aircraft, information was immediately transmitted to central plotting rooms where the air battle was coordinated. The Chain Home system had limitations that Watson Watt's team worked to address. It was most effective at high altitudes but struggled with low-flying aircraft. The long wavelength radio waves reflected off the ground and sea, creating clutter that masked low-altitude targets. A supplementary system called Chain Home Low was developed, using shorter wavelengths that provided better low-altitude coverage. Another challenge was determining the exact location of detected aircraft. Range measurement was accurate, but bearing determination was less precise. Multiple stations would track the same target from different locations, and triangulation would provide accurate position fixes. The human element was as important as the technology. Thousands of men and women were trained as radar operators. Many were Women's Auxiliary Air Force volunteers. They learned to interpret the green traces on the oscilloscope screens, distinguishing aircraft from weather or equipment anomalies. Operators worked in darkened rooms, eyes fixed on the glowing displays, ready to sound the alarm at the first sign of enemy approach. The tension was constant, especially during the early war years. When German invasion seemed imminent, Fighter Command integrated radar data into their defensive strategy. When radar detected incoming raids, controllers would scramble fighters, directing them to intercept positions calculated from the radar tracks. This system allowed efficient use of limited fighter resources. Instead of constant patrols that exhausted pilots and aircraft, fighters could wait on the ground until radar provided warning, then take off with time to climb to altitude and position for attack. This tactical advantage would prove decisive in the coming battle. The Germans knew Britain had developed some kind of detection system. The tall towers were visible, and German intelligence had picked up radio transmissions. But they underestimated the system's effectiveness. German scientists believed the towers were for long-range navigation, not realizing they formed a comprehensive air defense network. This intelligence failure would cost Germany dearly. In July 1940, Germany launched Operation Eagle, the air campaign to destroy the RAF. Hitler needed air superiority before invading Britain. The Luftwaffe had over 2,500 aircraft available for the assault. Britain's fighter command had fewer than 700 operational fighters. The numerical odds heavily favored Germany, but Britain had radar, and that would make all the difference. From the beginning of the battle, radar provided early warning. German bombers and fighters would appear on chain home screens as soon as they took off from bases in France. Operators tracked the formations as they assembled over the channel, providing fighter command with 20 to 30 minutes of warning. This advance notice was invaluable. RAF fighters could take off and climb to advantageous altitude, meeting the Germans with speed and position on their side. Without radar, British fighters would have been caught on the ground, or at low altitude where German fighters had every advantage. Radar also allowed fighter command to preserve their strength. Controllers knew exactly where German formations were, and could vector fighters to intercept only real threats. This meant fewer wasted patrols and less pilot fatigue. The Germans flew feints and diversions to confuse defenders, but radar allowed British controllers to see through these tactics, identifying which formations were serious threats. The Luftwaffe's commander, Hermann Göring, became frustrated. No matter when or where his aircraft attacked, RAF fighters were waiting. He couldn't understand how the British always seemed to know his plans. In August, the Germans finally recognized that the radar towers were key. They launched concentrated attacks on several chain home stations. Bombs damaged some stations, destroying buildings and equipment, but the tall steel towers proved remarkably resistant to damage. Bombs passed through the latticework without bringing them down. Repair crews worked around the clock to restore damaged stations, often getting systems back online within hours of an attack. Watson Watt had anticipated attacks on radar stations. He had designed the system with redundancy and quick repair in mind. Critical components were modular and could be rapidly replaced. The Germans soon gave up trying to destroy the radar network. The effort required was too great and the results too temporary. This decision was a crucial strategic error. Instead, the Luftwaffe switched to attacking RAF airfields, but radar continued to provide warning of every raid. Throughout August and September, the battle raged in the skies. RAF losses were heavy, but German losses were heavier. Radar gave British fighters just enough edge to make the difference. By late September, it was clear the Luftwaffe had failed. They could not achieve air superiority over Britain. Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. The Battle of Britain was won. Winston Churchill famously said that never had so many owed so much to so few. He was speaking of the RAF pilots who flew and fought, but he could have included the radar operators and engineers, whose invisible technology made victory possible. While Chainhome defended Britain from high-altitude raids, a new threat emerged at night. German bombers attacked under cover of darkness when visual interception was nearly impossible. Chainhome could detect the bombers, but fighters couldn't find them in the dark. What was needed was radar small enough to fit in a fighter aircraft. This presented enormous technical challenges. Chainhome used massive towers and powerful transmitters. An airborne system would need to work with limited size, weight, and power. The solution required a breakthrough in radar technology. Scientists at Birmingham University had been working on a revolutionary device called the cavity magnetron, invented by John Randall and Harry Boot. The cavity magnetron could generate powerful microwaves in a compact package. This device was arguably as important to the war as radar itself. Microwaves had much shorter wavelengths than the radio waves used by Chainhome. This allowed for smaller antennas and more precise detection. It also meant better resolution and the ability to detect smaller targets. Using the cavity magnetron, engineers developed airborne interception radar. Known as AI radar, it could be installed in night fighter aircraft. The system consisted of a small radar set with antennas in the nose. and a display screen for the radar operator seated behind the pilot. The operator would watch the screen for echoes from enemy bombers, then guide the pilot to intercept position using voice instructions. Early versions of AI radar had limited range and reliability issues, but by late 1940, improved models were entering service. The Bristol Beaufighter was equipped with AI Mark IV radar. This combination created an effective night fighter system. Chainhome would detect incoming bombers and vector the Beaufighter toward them. Once within a few miles, the AI radar would take over, guiding the fighter to within visual range for the final attack. The first AI radar kill came in November 1940. A Beaufighter crew successfully tracked and shot down a German bomber in darkness. More successes followed as pilots and operators gained experience. By 1941, German bomber losses at night were climbing steadily. The Luftwaffe couldn't understand how British fighters found them in the dark. British intelligence spread rumors about pilots eating carrots. To improve their night vision, this deception worked surprisingly well, concealing the true source of British night fighting capability. AI radar continued to improve throughout the war. Later versions had greater range and better resolution. Some could even display a primitive map showing ground features. The Mosquito night fighter, equipped with advanced AI radar, became one of the most effective aircraft of the war. Airborne radar wasn't limited to fighters. Bomber aircraft used radar for navigation and target finding. H-2S radar provided a radar map of the ground below, allowing bombers to navigate and identify targets through clouds. Coastal Command aircraft hunted submarines with airborne radar, detecting surfaced U-boats at night or in poor visibility. This capability helped turn the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. The cavity magnetron that made all this possible was shared with the United States in 1940. American scientists called it the most valuable cargo ever brought to America. It revolutionized American radar development and led to radar systems that equipped Allied forces worldwide. Radar technology was quickly adapted for naval use with dramatic results. Ships had always been vulnerable at night and in poor weather. Enemy vessels could approach unseen until they were dangerously close. Naval radar changed this fundamental tactical situation. Early naval radar systems were adaptations of Chainhome technology. Large, heavy, and somewhat unreliable, but they worked. By 1941, most Royal Navy capital ships had radar installed. These sets could detect other ships at ranges of 10 miles or more. Aircraft could be detected at even greater distances. The tactical advantages were enormous. Ships with radar could detect enemy vessels first. This allowed them to maneuver into advantageous positions, or avoid engagement entirely if outgunned. Radar also improved gunnery accuracy dramatically. Range to target could be precisely measured, allowing gunners to set their sights accurately from the first salvo. In night actions, radar-equipped ships had overwhelming advantage. They could track enemy movements and fire accurately in complete darkness. While the enemy was blind and firing by guesswork, the Battle of Cape Matapan in March 1941 demonstrated radar's impact on naval warfare. British ships used radar to track Italian warships at night. The Italians had no radar and were completely unaware that British ships were closing in total darkness. When the British opened fire at point-blank range, the Italians were caught completely by surprise. 3 Italian heavy cruisers were sunk in minutes, with minimal British casualties. This battle demonstrated that radar had fundamentally changed naval combat. As the war progressed, naval radar became more sophisticated. Smaller sets were developed for destroyers and escort vessels. These proved invaluable in convoy defense against submarines and aircraft. Fire control radars allowed anti-aircraft guns to track targets and predict their future position for accurate shooting. Surface search radars could detect periscopes in small boats, making submarine operations increasingly dangerous. The Germans and Japanese eventually developed their own naval radar, but they lagged behind Allied technology throughout the war. By 1943, Allied naval superiority was partly due to radar advantage. Ships and aircraft could find and track enemy vessels in conditions where the enemy was effectively blind. The Battle of the Atlantic, the longest campaign of the war, was significantly influenced by radar technology. Aircraft and escort ships equipped with radar could detect surface submarines and attack before they could dive. This forced U-boats to remain submerged longer, reducing their effectiveness and operational range. By 1943, the U-boat threat had been largely contained. Radar played a crucial role in this victory. When Britain shared radar technology with the United States in 1940, it sparked an explosion of American radar development. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology established the Radiation Laboratory, known as the Rad Lab, where hundreds of scientists worked on radar. American industrial capacity allowed radar production on a massive scale. Companies like Western Electric, RCA, and General Electric manufactured tens of thousands of radar sets. The Americans didn't just copy British designs. They innovated and improved, creating new types of radar. The SCR-584 was an advanced anti-aircraft fire control radar. It could automatically track aircraft and direct guns to hit them. This system was devastatingly effective against German V-1 flying bombs, and later against Japanese kamikaze attacks. American forces deployed radar across every theater of war. In the Pacific, radar gave American ships crucial advantage. In the numerous night battles against the Japanese Navy, the Battle of Guadalcanal in November 1942 saw American ships using radar to devastating effect, detecting and engaging Japanese forces in complete darkness. The Japanese, with inferior radar technology, relied on traditional night fighting techniques and optical excellence. But this was no match for radar-directed gunnery. American bombers used radar for navigation over the vast Pacific, finding tiny islands in thousands of miles of ocean. H-2X radar allowed precision bombing through cloud cover. Over both Europe and Japan, the proximity fuse was another American radar innovation. A miniature radar set small enough to fit in an artillery shell. It would detect when the shell was near a target and automatically detonate for maximum effect. This technology was devastating against aircraft and was used to break up German infantry attacks in the Battle of the Bulge. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, drew many scientists from the Rad Lab. The skills learned in radar development were directly applicable to nuclear weapons work. By war's end, the United States had produced over 100,000 radar sets, equipping American forces and supplying allied nations. The Anglo-American Radar Partnership was one of the most successful technological collaborations of the war. Germany had actually been developing radar before the war began. German scientists understood the principles and built working systems. The Freya radar was operational by 1938. It could detect aircraft at ranges similar to early British radar. Germany also developed the Würzburg fire control radar, which was more advanced than early British equivalents. So why didn't Germany gain the same advantage from radar as Britain? Several factors explain this apparent paradox. First, Germany was on the offensive early in the war. Radar provides greatest advantage to defenders who need early warning. Germany's blitzkrieg strategy emphasized attack, not defense. Second, German radar development was fragmented. Different services pursued different systems with little coordination. Britain's centralized approach under Watson Watt was more effective. Third, Germany failed to develop the cavity magnetron. This meant German radar operated at longer wavelengths, requiring larger antennas and providing less resolution. Fourth, German leadership didn't fully appreciate radar's importance. Hitler and other Nazi leaders were skeptical of defensive technologies. They preferred investing in offensive weapons like bombers and tanks. As the war turned against Germany, they tried to catch up. By 1943, German night fighters had airborne radar. Similar to British AI sets, German radar-equipped fighters inflicted heavy losses on RAF bomber streams over Germany. The British responded with electronic countermeasures, dropping strips of aluminum foil called window or chaff. These strips reflected radar waves, creating thousands of false targets. German radar operators were overwhelmed by the clutter. Unable to distinguish real bombers from chaff clouds, the war became an electronic arms race, each side developing new radar systems and countermeasures. Britain and America had more resources for this competition, and generally stayed ahead of German developments. German U-boats were eventually equipped with radar detectors, warning submarines when they were being tracked by Allied radar. But this was a defensive measure that limited submarine effectiveness, rather than providing offensive advantage. By 1944, Allied radar superiority was clear. German forces operated under the constant disadvantage of being detected before they could detect the enemy. The invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, relied heavily on radar. In ways both obvious and subtle, Allied ships crossing the English Channel used radar for navigation, maintaining formation in darkness and poor weather. Thousands of vessels moved in coordinated waves, thanks to radar-assisted navigation and station-keeping. Naval gunfire support used radar to direct bombardment of German coastal defenses in the pre-dawn darkness. Warships accurately targeted enemy positions that would have been invisible without radar. Allied aircraft used radar to navigate to their drop zones. Paratroopers and glider troops landed behind enemy lines, guided by radar-equipped Pathfinder aircraft. The Allied air forces maintained complete air superiority over the beaches. Radar provided early warning of any German air attacks, allowing fighters to intercept before they reached the invasion fleet. Allied deception operations used radar ingeniously. Operation Taxable and Operation Glimmer used aircraft dropping chaff to simulate large naval forces. These fake fleets appeared on German radar screens, convincing the Germans that landings were occurring at Calais, far from the actual Normandy beaches. This deception helped ensure the real invasion achieved surprise. German radar along the French coast had been systematically attacked. In the months before D-Day, Allied bombers destroyed or damaged many German radar installations. Those that remained were jammed by Allied electronic warfare aircraft. This left German defenders partially blind, unable to properly assess the invasion size and direction. After the landings, radar continued to play crucial roles, controlling air traffic over the crowded beachhead, directing naval gunfire in support of advancing troops, warning of German air or naval counterattacks. The success of D-Day depended on many factors, but radar was fundamental to the operation. Without it, the invasion would have been far more difficult, perhaps impossible. In the Pacific War, radar proved equally decisive. The vast distances and frequent poor weather made radar essential for effective military operations. The Pearl Harbor attack in December 1941 ironically demonstrated radar's potential. 2 Army radar operators detected the incoming Japanese strike force more than 130 miles away an hour before the attack. Their warning was dismissed as a mistake. If it had been heeded, much of the damage might have been avoided. After Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy rapidly deployed radar across the Pacific Fleet. By the Battle of Midway in June 1942, American ships had radar while most Japanese vessels did not. This advantage helped American forces detect and track Japanese aircraft. American radar-equipped aircraft located the Japanese carrier force, enabling the devastating dive bomber attacks that turned the battle. As the war progressed, American radar technology improved dramatically. Fighter direction officers on carriers used radar to vector combat air patrols toward incoming Japanese strikes. This allowed efficient use of limited fighter resources. During the Marianas Turkey Shoot in June 1944, American fighters, directed by radar, destroyed over 600 Japanese aircraft for minimal American losses. The Japanese called it a one-sided massacre. Radar's advantage was a major factor in the outcome. Night battles in the Solomon Islands repeatedly demonstrated American radar superiority. American ships could detect and track Japanese forces in darkness, while Japanese ships, lacking effective radar, struggled to locate their targets. Submarine warfare also relied heavily on radar. American submarines used radar to locate targets and attack at night when they were hardest to detect. Japanese merchant shipping suffered catastrophic losses as radar-equipped American submarines hunted convoys with deadly efficiency. By 1945, Japan's war economy was strangled, largely due to submarine attacks guided by radar.